Alright, how's it going, y'all? So today, we're going over a ton of updates that UNIFI has added to the UNAS Pro since I reviewed it about 6 months ago. And they literally have been checking off all the items on my list that I really requested, and I think it is now a much more functional NAS for home labbers, honestly. I first talked about the UNAS Pro as a great thing for people who didn't want to really spend too much time in the NAS environment and just wanted something that would work and didn't have to configure a bunch of optional settings and things like that to really customize it. I think there's a massive market for that, and I still do. And I think now UNIFI is really trying to straddle that market while also having features that you can genuinely do a lot of home lab things and really even run Office file servers off of. They've added the ability to change your VLANs as well as separate out your two NICs so that one can be on one VLAN, one can be on the other VLAN, and separate out that traffic. They've also added the ability to have NFS, and it looks like RAID 6 is coming down very shortly. So currently I'm running version 1.19.1 because I'm keeping everything on release candidate, and to run 2.0 you need a non-release candidate version of UNIFI OS, but in UNIFI Drive Application 2.0.1, we also are getting a couple of really nice things that I'm not going to be able to show in this video yet, but you're going to be able to back up to OneDrive and Dropbox, which is absolutely great. I would love to still see them be able to reverse that down because I know a lot of people still like to use those cloud services for files, and having a local NAS be able to back up OneDrive, Dropbox, and Google Drive really easily, which it should be able to do pretty easily. Reversing that sync is not that hard, especially if they're using rclone underneath the hood, which I'm guessing they are. But now they've got the ability to back up to OneDrive and Dropbox. So now the backup options are a remote UNAS, another file server, Google Drive, and Dropbox and OneDrive, which really spreads out to a lot of other options. Then there's also another really nice quality of life thing for the way I set up time machine deployments for people, which is using shared drives instead of actual home folders for time machine backups. So the reason for that is I like to build a single time machine folder per Mac I am backing up as a shared folder, and that way they can all be isolated from each other. So that's going to be a very nice quality of life improvement for me as well. And so those are the major changes. If you look through there, there's also been tons and tons of bug fixes and tweaks like that, but really they've been adding a bunch of features that people have been asking for, and that's just how UNIFI works. They tend to send out products with the bare essentials, and then as they get feedback and as they find people using them in specific use cases, they really add in features. I mean, the UDM Pro that I bought 5-6 years ago now is a completely different router than it was when I bought it then. And that is really what it seems like they're doing with these UNAS Pros. And I'm sure down the line, they're going to be adding in additional versions that are not just rack mount. Did you know that you or I could go to any data broker's website today and buy anyone's personal data? It's on us to protect our personal data, and that's why I use today's sponsor, Aura. Aura keeps you safe online by doing all the hard work for you. Aura monitors data brokers who are selling your personal information and submits opt-out requests on your behalf. This will then keep your personal information off these sites, which will help protect you from identity theft, scams, and even spam. One of my favorite parts of using Aura is the massive reduction in spam calls that I used to get. Aura will also continuously monitor the dark web and alert you if they find your personal information. They even have a credit monitoring tool and will alert you if anybody tries to access your credit or your bank accounts. Plus, they give you up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case happen. Aura is easy to set up and use, and it provides all of these services and more, including a password manager, VPN, and antivirus, all included at one low price. Stop leaving yourself vulnerable to data breaches and brokers. Check out my link in the description below, aura.com/spacerex, to get a free 14-day trial and see if any of your personal information has been exposed. Thanks to Aura for sponsoring this section of the video. Now back to the video. So I've gone ahead and I have updated my UNAS Pro to UNIFI OS 4.1.11. And by the way, that's the reason why we're running 1.19.1 and not 2.0 for UNIFI Drive application. Having the separate out OS and actual application versions kind of gets a little bit confusing, but I think it makes development for these things a lot easier, and I think that's why they do it. But that's how they're kind of staggered and stepped together. So this is what we're running right here. And because, as I said earlier, we're not running 2.0, we don't yet have those time machine options or the ability to back up to OneDrive and Dropbox. But I'm sure those will work just the same as everybody else. So the first really major update that I felt like they did, and they did really well, was the ability to have more customized controls over the network interfaces. If we come in here to our console, and we can now see that we can separate out the two network ports. So the UNAS Pro has two network ports on it, one SFP Plus port and one 1 gigabit RJ45 port. And currently I'm just hooked up to the 1 gigabit RJ45 port, and you can independently set them to different network interfaces. So previously you only had one device. It was two network ports, but really there was no way to use them in any way separately. But here you do have the ability to separate them all out, which is really useful if you're trying to run NFS. NFS is a protocol that is basically trusting. It is using IP-based authentication, and so IP-based authentication on a hostile network is very easy to spoof and not really secure. So if you're ever running NFS storage for virtual machines or just Linux devices, you really want to run that on a separate trusted network. Because otherwise, a device can just say, oh, hey, I'm actually that IP address. And if it's turned off, it can just kind of do that. And then it would have access to all the folders that the other server had access to. And so to get around that, what you do is you actually separate your NFS traffic to an entirely separate VLAN. That way your less trusted devices just can't go ahead and say, oh, I'm on that IP address, because that IP address is on a separate VLAN and that traffic just will not route on the VLAN they're on. So what you could do is you could keep your 1 gig connection for your regular stuff, and then the SFP Plus connection for your virtual machine storage, your backups, or anything like that that is using Linux NFS. One other thing I'd love to see them do here, and it's a thing Synology doesn't even do either, is I'd love to see them have the ability to assign multiple VLANs to one interface. This is something that's really, really, really useful for a storage server, especially one that only has two network interfaces. So what you could do is, using tagged VLANs, you could actually pass through 4 or 5 different VLANs to this SFP Plus connection and actually have an IP address of the UNAS on each of those. And so that way you're not routing your storage through a firewall or anything like that, and it can be on all your networks that you need it. Once again, this is probably out of the scope of this specific device, just because this is not an enterprise storage server. But that is something that's really useful, and it's great having on TrueNAS, because that way, if I need something on an interface, it doesn't have to go through the firewall, and it can be just segmented to that one VLAN. They've also made some nice quality of life updates to SNMP monitoring, though I've still not seen an actual data sheet that tells you what all the SNMP things do. I don't think they've compiled that yet. So I'm pretty sure if you just use like a standard Zabbix template with Linux, it should probably monitor everything. But I'd love to see them expand this out to actually being able to look at the health of the drives and things like that, that Synology has done with their actual paper. I believe it's called like MIB, that actually tells you every SNMP address, what it means, and how to use it. And that's something I've just not seen them publish yet. And it is a lot more useful in those enterprises. And so the last thing to point out before we go to the NFS section, I'm actually setting up and mounting on this computer, is they've also gone through and done a very good job with adding in a lot more information here about logging and just what's going on. And I think that's something that UNIFI does very well in general, especially the ability to have these logs that are then kind of searchable. So you can see right here, hey, this is me who did it. And I can click on it and go to my profile. Those are things that other logs just don't do. You have to look it up in the appropriate location. And I think it's really nice to have. We've got our backups that go ahead and do that. We've got our snapshot. And also whenever we've added in services and who's connecting. And so you can see right here, I was getting NFS all configured, and you can see all of that right here. And so I really like this log page, and I think it's just become a lot easier to use. There's a whole lot more information here. All right, and so now that's it for the updates. Let's go in and actually set up NFS. So this is something that is really useful in a few workflows. Really, if you're doing anything with virtualization, it's great having NFS for virtual machines. You can either run them directly off the box, or more likely than not, you want to have a bulk storage where the virtual machine doesn't have to have a 2 terabyte hard drive hooked up to it. but rather just gets to hook up directly to the UNAS Pro. And with Linux, that is really done via NFS. You can do it with SMB, but SMB isn't optimized for Linux permissions and things like that. So having it with NFS will give you much lower latency in general. And for bulk file storage, I think NFS is just the best option rather than actually creating a credential for SMB, but it does depend on what the files are accessing. The other thing is a lot of virtual machines, especially Zen Orchestra, like to back up to an NFS server. They can back up to SMB, but it does have some performance bottlenecks to it and it's not as efficient. And so NFS is really useful, and it was the major feature missing from the original UNAS Pro. And I wasn't sure if they were going to add it because I wasn't sure where they were trying to position this device, but I think they've done it very well. So NFS is hard to implement simply. You've got to have it on its own individual VLAN. You've got to set up your permissions, and it's very different how SMB works. And so I wasn't sure if they were going to try to add it because it is complicated. You have to do a lot of things, and I didn't know if they could boil it down to a very simple click, 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 but I think they have done it. They've removed out a lot of the unnecessary options, and they have the just base level. It'll work in most cases as long as you're able to run NFS v3. So to do that, we come in and we go into our services right here, and we can see that there is this section right here for NFS. And it says it only works NFS v3 for Linux, and currently it does not work with encrypted shared drives, but we can go ahead and enable it and apply changes. So now the way this works is it's all on this page, which I think is actually quite nice. There is a little help article right here, and it'll just tell you how to mount the drive. But we're going to go ahead and just do it here. We're just going to say add NFS connection. And I'm going to go ahead and just plug in the local IP address of my Mac on Wi-Fi. I had said earlier that this was not the secure way to do it, and it's not. Really, if I was doing this properly, I'd have it on my storage VLAN, but in this case, we're keeping it super simple just for this demo. And so what you want to plug in right here is the local IP address of the device that you want to be able to connect to this server. So in this case, this is currently the Wi-Fi address of this Mac, and that's how we're going to be mapping it. Note, if some other device takes this, it has permission of whatever you set here, so be careful with it. Then we're going to go ahead and hit add shared drives, and we're just going to say what we want to be able to do. And there's two options, read only and read write. And so this is where they've really just kind of simplified it on out. There's so many other NFS options out there, but it kind of boils down to this in most cases. Now, one other thing that NFS has is the way you mount it is a bit complicated. You can see that right here. So they are doing a symlink to this var NFS shared folder rather than directly mounting to the folder, which is kind of odd. And for whatever reason, I wish they would give you a little option right here to just copy this, because you actually have to go in and paste in whatever the name of your shared folder is right there. So it's a little odd, and this will only work on Linux, who is running NFS v3. Instead, I'm going to be doing this on Mac OS, and so there's a slightly different way you've got to do it that I'll go ahead and show here. But essentially what you do is you just tell it to mount it, and it pretty much just works. So on Mac OS, NFS v3, I believe, is disabled by default, and it's not negotiating properly. So if you just try to do it through Finder, it's not going to work. So you do have to do it through terminal. But I'm going to go ahead and just paste in that terminal command now. So first, I need to go ahead and create a place for it to mount. I'm just going to put it in my user folder called test NFS. And then this right here is the actual script. So it is basically just saying, hey, you've got to use NFS v3 and TCP. I tried it with just NFS v3 and I was having trouble mounting it. So I'll go ahead and leave a link down in the description below to this. And then what you do, you replace whatever is right here with the name of your shared folder. So my shared drive is called NFS. And so I replace this with just NFS. I have no idea how this works with spaces. And then I'm mounting it to the directory in here called test NFS. And so just like that, you can see it pops up right here. And we just double click on it. And these are some files I stuck in there earlier. And now you're just mapped with NFS. I generally would not recommend using NFS for macOS. SMB makes a lot more sense unless you're running a special server on here that you need NFS for, just because their permissions are a lot more complicated and it doesn't unmount and mount as easily. But especially if you're doing things in Linux, NFS is critical and super useful to have. And it actually seems to do a pretty okay job of working in between NFS and SMB. I've not fully tested it, but folders I've created in NFS have shown up on SMB and vice versa, which is great. You may still run into some oddities. And just like that, we're mounted with NFS, and we can add in additional either shared drives or also add in additional hosts that we want to be able to connect all through that. All right, well, I think that's going to be it for this overview. They've added a ton of useful features, and having that NFS, they did it really easily, and I'm very happy with where it's at. If you have any other questions, put those down in the comments below. And if you want to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below. And have a good one. Bye.